Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking into the life of Li Hongzhi, the founder of Falun Gong.
Okay.
Our main source today is going to be his Wikipedia article, but
Mm-hmm.
as you can probably imagine, with anything surrounding Li Hongzhi and Falun Gong,
Right.
things can get a little bit tricky.
Yeah. That's putting it lightly,
Okay.
because the information about Lee's life is often presented in two very, very different ways, and these perspectives clash quite a bit.
Okay, so let's just dive right into that then. On the one hand, you have this Falun Gong perspective,
Hmm.
which paints Li Hongzhi as this almost mythical figure.
Yeah.
They say he was born with supernatural abilities.
Right.
Then on the other hand, you have the Chinese government, which paints a much more ordinary picture.
Yeah, it's like looking at two different people, right?
Yeah.
And one of the most fascinating instances of this is the debate surrounding his birth date.
Oh, okay.
So Falun Gong sources claim he was born on May 13th, 1951,
Okay.
which just so happens to be Buddha's birthday. But the Chinese government insists that his birth date was actually July 7th, 1952. And they've even gone so far as to suggest that the chosen date of Buddha's birthday might be a deliberate attempt to connect Li Hongzhi to Buddha and enhance his spiritual credibility.
So what are we supposed to do with that? Are we supposed to just pick a side?
I don't think it's about picking sides. It's more about understanding that this discrepancy highlights the difficulty in verifying information about Li. And it underscores the need for critical analysis when looking at different sources. Because for some people, this detail about his birth date fuels their doubt about his credibility.
So it's not just about the date itself, but what that date represents.
Right.
Okay, I get that. Now, to further complicate things, there are these very contrasting narratives about Li Hongzhi's early life. You have this Falun Gong produced biography that tells this captivating story. Li, born into poverty, learned the value of hard work from a young age. And this biography claims that he trained under 4 masters in various spiritual and martial disciplines. They even say that he developed supernatural powers by the age of 8.
Yeah, and this biography goes on to portray him as this child prodigy who could do things like become invisible and levitate by 8 years old. It also mentions that he refused to participate in any activities during the Cultural Revolution, which further builds this image of him being different or special. Then the narrative explains that he synthesized all of his teachings into what became Falun Gong by 1989.
And that's when he started teaching it publicly in 1992.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But now let's contrast that with the picture that is painted by the Chinese government.
Right.
They present a much more grounded version of Li's life. An ordinary childhood, an average student, someone who held a series of regular jobs, really emphasizing that he doesn't have this extensive higher education. They even offer accounts from people who supposedly knew Li, claiming they never saw any evidence of Qigong practice or any connection to these masters.
Wait, hold on. Before we go any further, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly is Qigong?
That's a great point. Qigong is a practice. It's almost like a mind-body exercise that involves coordinating breath movement and meditation to cultivate and balance qi, which is this vital energy in the body. It's been practiced in China for centuries, often associated with promoting health and well-being.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So we have these 2 drastically different narratives about Li Hongzhi's life. How are we supposed to make sense of this? It almost feels like each side is trying to create an image of him that serves their own purpose, right?
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation. You have to think about the motivations here. The Falun Gong perspective wants to present Li Hongzhi as this divinely chosen leader, someone with extraordinary abilities. It helps add weight and credibility to the movement's teachings.
Right. And on the flip side, the Chinese government wants to portray him as just an average person who has maybe fabricated parts of his background to gain influence and a following. It's almost like a tug of war for who gets to control the narrative.
That's a great analogy. And this struggle over Li Hongzhi's image is really important because it really frames how people view not just him, but the entire Falun Gong movement as a whole.
Okay, so the takeaway here is that we need to be really careful about just accepting any single narrative as the whole truth. The reality is probably somewhere in the middle, which brings us to the heart of this deep dive, Falun Gong itself.
Now, before we get into the details, I think it's important to understand what Falun Gong actually is and where it came from. Officially called Falun Dafa, which translates to Great Law of the Wheel of Dharma. It was introduced to the public by Li Hongzhi in 1992. It's essentially a spiritual practice rooted in the tradition of Qigong, but with a distinct focus on moral and spiritual development.
And what makes it different from other Qigong practices?
Well, Falun Gong emphasizes three core principles: truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. These principles were meant to guide practitioners towards self-cultivation and spiritual enlightenment. And a key part of the practice involves specific exercises and meditation techniques, which are believed to improve health and well-being.
So it's not just about physical health, but also about cultivating a better, more compassionate self. And Li Hongzhi is the central figure in all of this.
Absolutely. He's considered much more than just a teacher to Falun Gong practitioners. He's considered a spiritual master,
Yeah.
even a divine figure by many. His teachings are regarded as the ultimate authority within the belief system. It's his lectures and writings that form the core of what Falun Gong is all about. And this is where his charismatic leadership comes in.
Right. I imagine that played a big part in the movement's rapid rise in popularity during the 1990s.
Definitely. People were drawn to his teachings and his message of self-improvement and spiritual enlightenment. He claimed to have supernatural powers, including the ability to heal people. And he was very critical of other Qigong practices, positioning Falun Gong as the only true path.
So in a sense, he created this sense of exclusivity around Falun Gong. It's like, this is the real deal. Everything else is a deviation.
Exactly. And that kind of message, combined with his charisma and the promise of tangible benefits, was very appealing to people, especially in a time when China was going through such rapid social and economic changes. People were looking for something to hold on to, something to believe in.
It makes you wonder how Li Hongzhi's own life experiences, especially those early years we talked about, might have shaped his teachings and his worldview.
That's a great question, and one that historians and scholars are still trying to unpack. There's so much we don't know for sure, but what we do know is that his influence grew rapidly within China. But his story doesn't stay there. In fact, things take a pretty dramatic turn when he begins teaching Falun Gong outside of China. We'll explore that part of the story after a quick break.
So Li Hongzhi's influence starts expanding beyond China. That must have been a significant turning point for him and the movement.
Absolutely. In the mid-1990s, Li began traveling and teaching in other countries, holding seminars in places like Europe, North America, even Australia. And initially, he was actually quite well received in the West. People saw him as this peaceful spiritual leader who promoted self-improvement and harmony. He even received awards and recognition from various cities, even becoming an honorary citizen of Houston, Texas.
Wow. Honorary citizen? But we know things didn't exactly stay rosy. What happened?
Well, things changed drastically in 1999, when the Chinese government decided to crack down on Falun Gong.
Oh.
They labeled it an evil cult and accused Li Hongzhi of disrupting public order and spreading what they called heterodox teachings.
Hold on. Heterodox teachings. What does that even mean?
So in this context, it means teachings that go against the officially sanctioned doctrines or beliefs.
Okay.
The Chinese government essentially saw Falun Gong as a threat because its teachings didn't align with the Communist Party's ideology and control.
Got it.
This crackdown led to Li Hongzhi being put on a wanted list in China, forcing him to remain in the United States, where he had already become a permanent resident in 1998.
So wait, he's labeled a criminal in his home country, but celebrated in the U.S. What happened next? Did they try to extradite him?
They did. The Chinese government actually requested that Interpol arrest Li Hongzhi.
Okay.
But get this, Interpol refused,
Yeah.
stating that the charges appeared to be politically and religiously motivated.
Wow. That's a pretty big statement from Interpol. And this must have played right into Falun Gong's narrative of being persecuted.
Absolutely. This refusal from Interpol really added fuel to the fire. It solidified this image of Falun Gong as a victim of political oppression, further strengthening their message to the world. Li, now living in exile in the U.S., became this symbol of resistance against the Chinese regime.
Right.
But while many sympathize with Falun Gong's plight, some of Li Hongzhi's own statements and beliefs started to raise eyebrows, even among his supporters.
You're talking about some of his more controversial claims, right? The ones about aliens and conspiracies.
Exactly. He's repeatedly stated that aliens from other dimensions are present on Earth and are secretly manipulating things like technology warfare and even human morality.
Okay.
He even suggested that modern science and the mixing of races are part of their plan to take over humanity.
Those are some pretty wild claims. It makes you wonder how those beliefs fit in with the core principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance that Falun Gong promotes. It seems kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
It certainly creates a sense of dissonance for some people.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have these teachings about being truthful and compassionate, and then you have these claims about alien conspiracies that are difficult to verify.
Right, and it's not just the alien stuff. Li Hongzhi has also continued to assert his own special status, claiming to have supernatural powers like being invisible and being able to walk through walls.
And there's this interesting instruction he gives to his followers. He openly claims these powers to them, yet he also tells them to lie about it to outsiders.
Wait, really? Lie about it? That seems to directly contradict the whole truthfulness thing, doesn't it?
It does. And this contradiction has been a point of contention for many critics of Falun Gong. It raises questions about the movement's transparency and whether Li Hongzhi is truly practicing what he preaches.
Okay, so we have this complex figure, revered by many as a spiritual leader, but accused of fabricating his past. He preaches peace and compassion, but also warns about alien conspiracies. He emphasizes truthfulness, yet encourages his followers to be deceitful with outsiders. It's a lot to take in. Where do we even go from here?
To really understand the full impact of Li Hongzhi, we need to look at the organizations he founded, specifically Shen Yun and the Epoch Times.
Oh, okay.
These organizations have played a key role in spreading his worldview, and in some cases have become intertwined with politics, and even, as you mentioned, conspiracy theories.
Now that we've explored Li's journey abroad, let's look at how he's continued to influence the movement through these organizations. Starting with Shen Yun. Those elaborate dance productions, they seem to be everywhere, from Broadway to small-town theater.
Yeah, it's quite a phenomenon. While Shen Yun presents itself as this celebration of traditional Chinese culture and performing arts, it's widely recognized as an extension of Falun Gong.
So there's more to it than meets the eye.
Yes. The performances are often infused with storylines and themes that align with Falun Gong's teachings. You'll see depictions of the persecution faced by practitioners in China, aiming to garner sympathy for the movement. It's a subtle way of raising awareness and shaping public perception.
Ah, I see. It's like a form of soft power, using art and performance to influence opinions and narratives. Pretty clever, actually.
Indeed. And then we have the Epoch Times, which started as a platform to share Falun Gong viewpoints, but has taken a sharp turn in recent years.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Their coverage has become increasingly political, especially in their coverage of U.S. politics.
Yeah, they've aligned themselves very strongly with certain conservative ideologies and figures, particularly Donald Trump, often echoing his talking points, including claims of election fraud.
That's quite a shift from their initial focus on Falun Gong and its teachings. It really makes you wonder about their motivations and whether they're now serving a different agenda altogether.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really blurs the lines between a spiritual movement, a media outlet, and a political force.
Right.
And we have to consider the implications of this entanglement, especially given the current climate of political polarization and the spread of misinformation. It's a slippery slope,
Yeah.
and one that has generated a lot of discussion and debate.
It definitely raises some red flags. If an organization that claims to value truthfulness and compassion starts promoting unsubstantiated claims or divisive rhetoric, it really undermines their credibility.
Precisely. And this brings us back to Li Hongzhi's influence. While the exact financial and organizational connections between Falun Gong, Shen Yun, and the Epoch Times aren't entirely clear, Li's teachings and worldview are undeniably woven into these organizations.
So he's not just a spiritual leader anymore, he's a media figure and indirectly a political influencer too.
It's a complex web of interconnected entities, each amplifying and spreading Li's message to both Falun Gong practitioners and the general public.
This is where it gets really tricky for me. How can we reconcile Li's controversial claims like the alien theories with Falun Gong's core principles? And how much influence does he actually have on the direction of these organizations? Are they truly reflecting his beliefs, or are they operating independently?
These are all valid questions, and they get to the heart of the complexities surrounding Li Hongzhi and Falun Gong. It's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers, especially when navigating information. From sources tied to specific ideologies or belief systems, we can't just take things at face value.
You're right. We need to question motivations, consider the context, and look for evidence. It's about becoming savvy consumers of information, which is especially important today with all the misinformation flying around. We can't just blindly accept what we're told.
Exactly. We need to dig deeper, seek multiple perspectives, and come to our own informed conclusions. And, that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not about giving you easy answers. It's about encouraging you to think critically and engage with complex issues.
Well said. So with that in mind, Let's delve even deeper into these questions and try to unpack the contradictions and complexities that surround Li Hongzhi and the movement he created. Stay with us. We've been on quite the journey, exploring the life and legacy of Li Hongzhi, and it seems like every twist and turn just brings up even more questions.
That's the nature of deep dives, isn't it? We often start with a simple question, and the further we go, the more nuanced and complex the answers become.
Exactly. And right now I'm grappling with this issue of Falun Gong's core principles, especially truthfulness. Being at odds with some of the things we see coming from the movement and its offshoots.
Yeah, it's a valid point. We have Li Hongzhi making claims about alien supernatural powers, and then instructing his followers to be less than truthful with those outside the movement. Then there's the Epoch Times, initially focused on sharing Falun Gong's perspective, but now deeply entrenched in partisan politics and promoting information that many consider misleading.
It's like this dissonance between what they say they believe and what they're actually doing. How do we make sense of that?
It's a question that each individual has to wrestle with, right? It's important to recognize that these contradictions exist, and they do raise concerns about the authenticity and integrity of the movement as a whole.
But isn't it possible that some of these actions, like the Epoch Times political stance, are a response to the persecution they've faced? Maybe they feel like they have to fight fire with fire.
That's a perspective that some people offer, and it's worth considering. However, critics would argue that even if their intentions are rooted in a sense of self-preservation, promoting potentially misleading information, or aligning with specific political agendas, ultimately undermines the principles of truthfulness and compassion that they claim to uphold.
So it's a bit of a moral dilemma, isn't it? Where do you draw the line between defending yourself and compromising your values?
It certainly is. And it's a reminder that even organizations claiming to be rooted in spirituality and high moral principles can still be susceptible to the allures of power, influence, and ideology.
Right. It's a cautionary tale for all of us. We need to be aware of the potential for manipulation, even from sources we might initially perceive as trustworthy or benevolent.
Absolutely. It all comes back to being critical thinkers.
Right.
We can't just blindly accept information, especially in today's world where information is so easily weaponized.
It's easy to get caught up in a compelling narrative or a charismatic leader's message. But we have a responsibility to look beyond the surface, to question motivations and to seek out multiple perspectives.
And that includes acknowledging the nuances. It's not about painting everything in black and white. There are undoubtedly many sincere Falun Gong practitioners who find genuine meaning and benefit in the practice. And we can't dismiss the very real persecution they faced in China, a human rights issue that deserves attention and condemnation.
That's an important point. It's about recognizing the complexities and not oversimplifying the situation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the humanity of all involved, even those we might disagree with. It's about understanding that everyone has their reasons, their beliefs, and their experiences that shape their actions.
So where does this leave us in our understanding of Li Hongzhi and Falun Gong?
Well, I think we've learned that it's not a simple story with easy answers. There are layers of contradictions, complexities, and unanswered questions.
We've seen how a spiritual movement with seemingly noble intentions can become entangled with politics, media, and even conspiracy theories, raising concerns about authenticity and motivations.
We've explored the challenges of discerning truth from misinformation, especially when dealing with organizations with strong ideologies and agendas.
And ultimately, it's a reminder that we as consumers of information have a responsibility to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, and to approach complex issues with an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We've only scratched the surface here, and there's so much more to explore. But hopefully this deep dive has provided you with some insights, sparked your curiosity, and encouraged you to continue learning and questioning.
I know it has for me. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, and I'm sure our listeners will agree. So keep asking those tough questions, seek out diverse perspectives, and never stop learning. Thanks for joining us.